meander again in this session. Let me begin by talking about, and I want to make these high profile, but they're essentially hidden. Two hidden means of making disciples. I'll say of disciple making in the New Testament. And each one of them is major, but because they're not high profile, nobody writes about them in there. They just demonstrate it. But we don't tend to see it because we don't have a dominant paradigm of disciple making, so we don't tend to see this. Now, the first one is the regular circulation of spiritual reading material. And I'll cut across a lot of extraneous territory to say that every Christian ought to be like a library dispersing materials. I have a gigantic personal library. My library has 13,000 volumes in it. It fills a 41 by 19 room in the upstairs of our home. We have two office desks in there. One is my wife, she's my secretary. So yes, I'm having an affair with my secretary. Long-standing affair. And she is the best secretary I've ever had in my life. I've had a lot of secretaries. I've never known one like her. She just is incredible in her capabilities. And in other words, she files things that I wouldn't have the slightest idea where to find. I can ask her about it. She goes directly to the cabinet, pulls it out, and in that area right there, she has it instantly. And for a guy that's 112 years old, my wife is right on my heels, but she don't act like 112 years old. She's just got an incredibly organized mind. But now think of this right here. One of the best ways to evangelize is by this right here. I'm saved today because a man handed to another man a piece of paper on a sidewalk, a wide sidewalk in Chicago, Illinois, long before I was born. And that man took that piece of paper home, didn't even know he had dropped it in the pocket of his work uniform, got off at the 5 o'clock whistle back in the days when the whistle dismissed the work crew. He came down from his upstairs office, came out on the sidewalk, was walking toward his home, and he said, I don't know whether I was distracted, but I hit shoulders with a guy out on the sidewalk handing out little single slips of paper. And when we hit real hard, it turned us to face each other. He just extended that piece of paper toward me, and I took it. And he said, as far as I remember, not a word was spoken between us. And he got home that evening, took his clothes off while his wife is cooking supper, went up, took his clothes off, took a bath, came back by the bed, picked up the dirty clothes, put them in a clothes hamper, and when he started to walk back by the bed, he saw that piece of paper that had slid out the pocket of his work uniform. He went over there and picked it up and started reading. He said, I hadn't read one paragraph before I needed this more than I needed the air I was breathing. He said, I turned over, read the backside, 2/3 the way down, it told me what to do to be saved, eternally saved. He said, I turned it over and read it again. I got out on my knees beside the bed, read it a third time, and he was saved right there. He said I was saved right there on my knees beside the bed. His name is Joe Biney. He was a second-generation removed German from the old country in Chicago. Well, he put that piece of paper down on the lamp table at the head of the bed and went down to supper. When they finished supper, he couldn't even tell his wife what had happened. And when they finished supper, he took the newspaper, went off in another part of the house, started to read. She finished, went upstairs to clean up and put on leisure clothes for the evening. And she saw that piece of paper there. She read it, and she was saved. Right there. They went all the way to the next morning at breakfast. He went around the table. No, she went around the table. He was already seated. And she just suddenly broke down, fell on her knees and grabbed the edge of the table, started crying and said, "Joe, there's something I need to tell you." And she told him, and he started crying and said, "You too?" Well, in that home there was born a boy named Bob. In the meantime, updated a little bit, they moved to Winslow, Arkansas, which is 25 miles down into the mountains below my home. And on a hot July day, I'd gone to the swimming pool with 2 or 3 other guys, and there were just kids everywhere in that water on that red hot day. And I found an opening, and I said something I thought was real clever, took God's name in vain, coupled it with the dam, went diving into the waters, and laughing at myself all the time. Went swimming out, came up, came back in. When I started to get out of the water, Bob Biney, whose first name was all I knew, came down the edge of the pool, reached his hand down like this, with clothes like this. He got me up out of the water. He didn't let go of my hand. He pulled me right up to the hollow of his chest, holding my hand right there. My face was right here. When the water kind of got out of my eyes, he said, he looked right into my eyes and gently said, "Herb, do you know you just damned the only person who ever loved you enough to die for you?" That's all he said. Now, this is not reading material, but this is a word of witness. Very crucial. He never knew until I told him 9 months later what that meant. And that hit me like a sledgehammer. You just damned the only person. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I was as guilty as anybody could be guilty. And I carried that sentence for 9 months like a pregnancy, banging around in my heart, making all kinds of disturbance. I never let anybody know it. On my 18th birthday, a man told me how to be saved. And so every year now, I have 2 birthdays on the same day. And I'm 18 years younger than I look, thank you. Because the old man is dead, buried, gone, crucified with Christ. All God sees is the man I am made new. But he sees all the aspects of that. And 9 months later, I went to my first official prayer meeting. It was in Bob Biney's living room. It was high school juniors and seniors. And when it was over, I pulled him down a dark hallway, pinned him up against the wall, and I said, "Do you remember?" And I restructured that and said, he did not even remember saying that to me. See? He was passive. He did this so automatically, he didn't even have to think about it. The finest soul winner I've ever known. He's now gone to glory. He died as a result of an eye surgery that aborted. And there was a tumor right behind his eye next to his brain. But he died in surgery. And I just wonder, when Jesus summons him up there, here's what I think he'll say to him. Remember Paul and Timothy? He's going to say, the key question is, who comes after the believer's and? Now, sir, I want you to turn around and look behind you. He's going to look and see a sea of people behind him, like me, and he didn't even remember saying that to me, so every credit that goes to anything God does through me will go to him. He's going to be shocked at his reward just because he was faithful, and God not only maximizes that, he multiplies it. But if we could just see the integrity of this, never stop circulating reading materials. Those 5 movies I was talking about, I've seen every one of them at least 25 times each. I bought probably 25 copies of each to give them away. I want the person to give me a promise that he not only will look at this 2 or 3 times himself, but he will begin to share it, especially like Jonathan Sperry. It looks like a kid's movie, but it's everything but a kid's movie. I tell them, if you'll share this with children in your neighborhood, tell them take it home and watch it on their own television set, and invite their parents, or just let their parents come by and look at it. And you're on your way, because it is an irresistible time. Anybody can watch it I mean, he would have to be dead, triple, double, quadruple dead to not have any message or receive anything from it. So you just circulate evangelistic materials all the time. And one of the best ways is either reading or visual materials, spiritual reading or visual materials that give the gospel. And the New Testament is loaded with this. How did those letters ever become a part of the New Testament? Here's the other one. The writing of spiritual letters. See, this is hidden to us, but it should not be. Let me give you the stat. It's overwhelming. 21 out of the 27 books of the New Testament are personal letters. God is absolutely high on spiritual letters. And yet we've never seen that strategically. I wish you could come and watch my email exchange. When I'm at home, I will write at least 20 letters a day. Some of them are 3 and 4 pages. And they're dispatched all over the world, and then people write back and say, may I forward this to other people? And I say, certainly, be my guest. There's nothing, no private information in it. It's for publication. So write letters that sound like Paul's letters. Set your goal to master. Just take any one of them, master it, and then ask God to give you the facility and the mind, the mentality, to write letters that sound like Paul's letters and never stop flooding the mail with personal letters. We had a postman when we lived way out on Winchester, on Marconi Cove. We had a postman that was saved because of something someone wrote on the back of a letter. It was a gospel message just written on the back of the letter, and the postman rang one day and said, there's something I need to tell you. See, in other words, you don't know when God is in the ambush mode. But he has to have a weapon. By his choice. He never goes direct. By his choice. He has stationed a mediator between himself and man. And he has stationed an intermediary in the Christian between him and the prospect. You show me a place in the New Testament where God ever saved anybody without using a mediator. It's not there. So Satan's design is to keep that army of mediators or any intermediaries idle so that they never function. So regularly circulate spiritual reading materials. I tell my guys, anything in my library is yours. Here's what I used to do when I was in the pastor. I circulated the books out of which I was preparing my sermons. 3 months before I preached the sermon.
That's sneaky.
Is it really? You know what they would do?
It's strategic.
It's strategic. Here's what they'd do. They'd come by the door and they'd say, I know where you got that sermon. I'd say, I'm glad you noticed. You want to read some more? See, they love to take superiority over the preacher.
Oh, yeah.
Love to let you know, boy, I found out something about you. I said, I'm glad. No, you don't hide anything from them. Show them the mechanics of all of this.
Yeah.
How you think, how you prepare a sermon, how you develop it, how you preach it. All they know is, man, he's got an incredible gift. It's like the two farmers on the street corner. One of them said, boy, did God make a beautiful place out of your farm? The other one said, yeah, but you should have seen it when he had it all by himself. He uses human agency. Same thing is true here. So get in the habit of using these two hidden means of disciple making in the New Testament. Regular circulation of either visual, audio, or reading material, that is electronically visual, or writing of spiritual letters. Now remember this is no accident. 21 out of the 27 letters of the New Testament are personal letters. of the 27 books of the New Testament personal letters. Question: did any of those guys writing those letters have any idea that they would ever be part of a Bible?
No.
No. It would have shocked them to think this was going to be part of what? A Bible. They were just, every letter Paul wrote has one purpose. It is a disciple-making letter. Next time you read them with that in mind. He's devoted to a construction project in the life of the person to whom he's writing, or the church to whom he's writing. And by the way, don't think what we think of as church when you think of the word church in the New Testament. The church at Corinth was a tiny little group of people. Church at Rome, salute the church in your house, in her house, in his house. They were a tiny little group, and yet they turned the world upside down because of the strategy they followed. See, it doesn't make any difference. God's not impressed with all these monolithic buildings. They don't impress him at all. That which is today's cathedral will be tomorrow's museum.
Yeah.
Just go to Europe. You see those massive, big, Gothic buildings that are dark chambers of death. And now you pay a fee to get into that museum, and they'll take you through and tell you where everything happens, and then you'll never hear a word about Jesus. So the church is now in Europe a place to ignore, a building. Everybody ignores it. Tourists come and see it. America is fast on the heels of Europe. It's a matter of time now. We're like a shrinking island in a massive sea of humanity because we didn't listen to our contract. We put up big buildings and imploded them. That is the exact opposite of Christianity, that it exploded. Jesus built people who will go out to the ends of the earth till the end of time. He didn't build people who only, they came in to be equipped to go out. And when they were equipped, they're dismissed. So you should never worry about how big your church is or how many people it has in attendance. Ask how many are we equipping to make that standard we pictured a while ago, total world impact, effective everywhere they go, and building other people to compound the effort that they're doing. So again, it's massive. Now, I'm going to consult my notes. I want to give you several illustrations of this. And I'm about a third of the way. Yeah.
Don't take my
The
job.
eraser.
You're highly paid, but it's deferred. Your reward will come big time later. What'd you say you did, sir? Erased? What do you think that's worth? Oh, well, you didn't know where I erased. I think it'd probably be the other way around. You're trying to remember it. He's telling you about that time.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't recall. He said, well, it's good that you don't. I'll just go ahead and give it to you anyway. I want to tell you about several guys. And I'm not, this is more random than selective. These guys are very close to me. So I'm not telling you about someone who's a fourth or fifth generation Christian, typically, a disciple maker. I'm talking about guys that are very close to me. Does anyone here know Jim Douglas? Jim Douglas is an African American. He's a civil engineer. He's an engineer, let me say that. I'm not exactly sure of the preceding definition. His name is Jim Douglas. I met Jim when I went to an African American church to do a disciple-making conference at the pastor's request. And I didn't know anything about him at the time. I noticed this guy came and sat with his wife all the way to the back of the auditorium, second seat from the back. And he sat there with his arms folded, just glaring. He's a very imposing. He was the designated scorer for the Georgia Tech basketball game for 2 seasons. He's 50-something years old now. Now, before I started getting debilitated, I could match him shot for shot around the world. Free throws. we went 9 out of 10, and I made my first 9, and he missed his first one. I thought I could tell him to go sit down, but I missed my 10th one. It went in and out. So we went back in totally tied after going round and round and round again, shredding the nylon over and over again. This guy is a hoss. And he still looks like he could play today. He's in great shape. He just looks like there's not an ounce of anything but muscle on him. He's got a deep Hollywood voice. And if somebody hadn't captured him, he was the biggest troublemaker I have ever seen in a church. And his wife was a meek little female mouse trailing along. And so they sat back there, and he had his arms folded like just glared at me all week long. Well, I noticed him. I asked the pastor about him, and he explained that. He said, one after another person's come to me telling me to get rid of him because he's going to destroy this church. That's what they all say, he's going to destroy this church. And I told them, but he's not my project, he's God's project. Let's hold on and see what might happen. Well, the pastor didn't even know what he was saying. So I went and did that disciple-making conference, had a great time, but it didn't seem to faze him. But 6 months later, the pastor had me to come back and do a second one, and guess where Jim was this time?
Front row.
He was on the front row with a big, wide spiral notebook, and sitting there with that thing open, and Ramona is just all smiles sitting beside him. And when I start talking, he starts writing, and I wonder what. See, the pastor is one of my guys. And apparently he had already begun to set him up for this. And so he was there every single session except Thursday night. He had to work that night. He's got a government job. See, that sets him up for total world impact because he gets a day's vacation for every 2 weeks he works. And so he can go overseas 4, 5, 6 times a year and not miss anything. And the government will pay his way for his wife to go with him. So he discipled her, and now she disciples the pastor's wives while he goes and disciples the pastors. And so I began to talk to him that week. It was evident something had happened to him. Something big time. We just talked so fluidly. He was just at home, a big voice. He can sing like an angel. I hate the guy. I mean, he's got great presence in front of people. He's very articulate. Let me anticipate. He can teach 300 of my sessions on his feet without notes. You see, this is a motivated disciple maker. So when I take him overseas, all I have to do is say, Jim, this is your assignment and you're up now. He's on his feet. Teaches exactly the way it is in the recorded material, or he's got it on some electronic device, and he can pull it up and either have it in video on a little phone while listening to it, or he can take it in print. He's got a whole big notebook, in fact 3 notebooks he carries with him overseas, and he carries a duffel bag full of materials that he will give out to all the trainees over there. In other words, guys, stretch yourself and dream dreams. First stated outcome of Pentecost, the young men will see visions and the old men will dream dreams. Where is that happening in today's church? These are strategic dreams. Just look at the context. That's Acts 2:17. Strategic dreams. And so he began to develop. Well, I took him with me, 4 other guys, to Cameroon. I'll do this one myself. Sit down. You're worn out, I can tell. You're just worn out, so just sit this one out. Now, I'll get this one. I'll have you back when I got a major assignment on
Yes,
the board.
sir.
Yes, sir. Well, I do appreciate the help. That's facetious, but I really do appreciate the help. Takes a lot of stress off when you're not doubling up here with your back to the people you're talking to. But in 1995, I took a group of 5 men to Cameroon. Now Cameroon, here's what Africa looks like. Essentially like that. Oh, it's much, that's not exaggerated enough. It comes way inland like this and then dips off into South Africa, something like that. It's not as bulbous out here. Cameroon is a big nation. It is right here. So you see, it's strategic. This is sub-Saharan Africa down here. This is almost exclusively Islamic. And it's heavily Islamic the closer you are to this line from underneath. So northern Cameroon is a battleground. Chad is a big country right here. Nigeria, that's exaggerated again. Nigeria is a big country like this. And the northern part of it is butcherously Islamic, having all kinds of violent problems with Islam there. Then you've got Benin, Togo, Ghana. Here's Niger. Here's Congo. Here's the Democratic Republic of Congo. Pretty big country. And then you've got Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Kenya, beg your pardon, Kenya, Uganda, then you've got Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi. So you got all this belt of nations across here, and I'll repeat again, this part of the world is absolutely on fire for Christ. Just things that the map of it spiritually is changing every day radically, because Christians have shown themselves willing to count whether they live or die. And God will always camp out in a place like that. These are extremely happy people, but when you give them a strategy, they don't run run with it like Americans do. I mean, they'll never miss a breath, never miss a step. They'll be running with it from the moment they leave. And so I have an incredible email traffic with all these pastors who've been trained all up and down all these countries. Well, we went to Cameroon in 1995. This is Bamenda. Here is Yaoundé. This is a place named Buya. This is a place named Indu. This is the Baptist headquarters, main city. I think Bamenda is the capital city. I beg your pardon, Yaoundé, no, Bamenda is the capital city right in the center of the country. I think, I'm quoting from memory, and that's these days very suspect. But, so we went to this place right here, 5 trainees. We had 297 pastors. First time we went, we weren't prepared for that. Nobody told us what to expect. We thought we'd go and train a handful of people, so I took a team of 5. If I would have known we were going to have that many, I would have taken a team of at least 25. And we would have divided them up into halls and made it manageable for them to give more attention in small groups, which is much more effective than to blanket a big audience. But these people are exceptional. You blanket them, and a large number of them immediately emerge. It's not blanketing them, and then it baffles them, and you wonder what's going to happen, and you hope something's going to happen, and so do they. I mean, these people are waiting for truth. And they're so oriented to it that when they receive it, recognizable from Scripture, they immediately adapt their lifestyle to it. So we trained here and headed back home. Before we left, they invited us to come back 1 year later, so we put it on our calendar. The second time, I went back with 3 teams, sent a team up here, a team here, and a team here, and we had 610 pastors and leaders the second time, divided into 3 groups. It was evident God was doing something incredible there. I mean, the services were so anointed, it was just like heartbreak time when you walked into the building. And these guys, they waited. I came back. I was this team down here. I gave Jim Douglas the assignment of this one here for the simple reason that he's black. And I mean, it was an upheaval. And down here, the same thing happened. And up there, the same thing happened. And we drove back up here to take off our last day. And we got in at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were waiting out in front of my room in a circle of chairs. And when I walked up, they all stood and just kept on applauding. Just kept on clapping. I said, well, the star's coming.
Yeah.
I'm just a representative. So they sat back down, they said, we stayed to give you a report. This is an English-speaking country because it's colonial, English colonial, British colonial. And so they sat around, and one after another told of the results of what had happened since the last year. These guys were like stormtroopers on the march. It's not taking no for an answer anywhere they went. They had story after story, so I didn't get any sleep at all that night. Stayed up all night long. And we got on the plane and took off back for home. We got somewhere out over the water. And Jim Douglas is sitting beside me. The other three team members are near us. And I said, Jim, does anything not make any sense to you about this trip? Here's what he said. He said, don't say anything else. I'll take it. I said, excuse me, what did you think I was going to ask? He said, well, we think alike. I know what you're going to ask. I said, then tell me what I was going to ask. You were going to ask me if I would take over the assignment of this entire field. I said, how did you know that? He said, I tell you, we think alike. Our minds, our hearts, everything are alike. I said, okay, will you take it? He said, in a split second. I said, okay, I'm not going back. That's 2 times there. He started going 1 to 4 times. You know how he's able to do that? He's working on a depot at the demilitarized zone in Korea, and instead of going the western route from the United States, they go the eastern route and add a week, and the government pays for this because he's so valuable to that depot project. So Ramona goes with him. He does his job there, then he comes back to this place here and adds an extra week and disciples, and then he does this 3 or 4 times, the same route, because he's going to the same place 3, 4, 5 times a year over there to supervise the building of the depot. And so he stops at any of these places along the way, and they will pay her way and his way. Now, I want to tell you what's happening now. Now, that was in 1996. And as of now, the Cameroonians themselves are teaching these sessions in Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Chad, in multiple places in Nigeria, in Benin, in Togo, in Ghana, and they just opened the field within this last year in Niger. And they're building these people with a consummate view of multiplication. So what do you think is going to happen here? See, well, it's already happening. See, this is the reason you need to go, not just to encourage this and go equipped to boost it. You need to go and see it. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And this is only one tiny spot on earth. And Jim Douglas, my goodness, he goes like Soup Campbell does. Soup has been to the Philippines once this year. He's been to Angola, Africa with me one time. He's been to China 9 times. I say when you agree with God, He'll sponsor you at full cost anywhere. But if you disagree with Him, He'll sponsor yourself and you won't like the product. So these nations, I've been down here probably 6 times to South Africa. I've been to Mozambique, to Zimbabwe, to Malawi. I have not been to Namibia. That's an elusive spot for me. It's a desert country. And I've been to most of these countries up here, and then most of these countries in the belt of nations across here. And what is happening in these countries is off the map. Kenya and Uganda have become staging centers for explosive movements. And I just had an email, I've got it with me, just received it. from a guy begging me to come back to Eldred. It would be my 6th time to be there in Kenya, to come back. And he said, I will let you preach a crusade at night. Big crowds of people. I saw 8,000 professions of faith in 3 days in an open-air crusade that there was no preparation for. Didn't even know it was going to happen until that afternoon, the first afternoon I went out to preach. You won't see that here. Now that's highly suspect because those people had no forethought. And here I preached the gospel 3 times on Monday evening. We're supposed to be in by night. We didn't make it. There's a curfew in the city because of Islam. We didn't make it. Went back on Tuesday, preached. There were 500 people when we got out to the field. No announcement about this in any way. They didn't still know we preached. I preached to 3 groups the day before. We had over 900 professions of faith. And I did not let them see so they would come because others did. I had everybody bow their heads. I said, if you are for the first time in your life opening your heart in receptive faith to Jesus Christ, the Son of God, receive Him into His heart, receive the gift of eternal life and the forgiveness of your sins, and you want to trust Jesus to save you today. Now, the coordinator had put up a yellow ribbon out front and they were all outside. I said, I want you to look up and step around that ribbon. And then every one of them came. The second meeting, most of them came. Third one, most of them came. So about 900 people that day. Went back the next day, there were 500 people waiting in the field when we got there. So I preached 3 more times that day. The third day we got out there, you couldn't see the ground all the way to the end of the field in the direction toward the highway. You couldn't see the ground anywhere over here to the trees. Couldn't see the ground over there. Couldn't see the ground behind you. It was just jam-packed shoulder to shoulder with people. And so you preach the gospel. Where would you ever see anything like that in the United States? You say, yes, but. Well, you take your butts to God. Excuse me. Honestly, do it. I can't make that happen. I just yield to God. If half of them were saved, wonderful. Amen. The birth certificates are recorded in the safety deposit vault in heaven and is a copy in the heart of the saved person. Right. Thank God. But if one of them saved, that's more than we planned on. See? So I don't worry about anything like that. That's God's business to sort all that out. Well, that's Jim Douglas, and that's only one example. I want to give you one more. I can hand it this time again, Carl. Just keep you seated. Rest up for a bigger sign. All right, I want to tell you the story of the most innocent-looking guy I ever saw that got in on this. And what happened? When you realize his handicaps, you wonder how in the world could a guy like this ever be used? He and his wife, his name is Victor Coleman. He and his wife were IMB missionaries to Venezuela. Now that sounds very imposing, but you'll have to hear the whole story before you realize how little imposing that is. They were in Venezuela. Well, the church I was pastor of in Memphis had a growing missions mentality. So they bought 2 mission homes to house furloughing missionaries when they came in from the field. So they would always apply. We never went over 20 days with either one of those houses without having some mission family in it. One moved out, the next, when they got into the country, moved in for 6 months, whatever their furlough was, or a year. They came home for a year. Well, received a letter of application from him, very sweet letter. And I wrote back, and I have a form letter I enclosed with the letter we write to them individually. Form letter says, you can have the house if the male head of the family will meet with me in the conference room of the church for a 2-hour period at least once a week. You know why? Because missionaries typically have never been discipled. And yet we make heroes out of them because they go further than anybody else. Well, so what? I mean, if you reach the uttermost part of the earth, Luke 11 says you're only doing what you're supposed to do. So you say we are unprofitable servants. There's no impression. You can't get ahead in grace. You don't have to. You can't fall behind in grace. You're sponsored and covered all the way if you'll defer to the sponsorship. See? So they came. He wrote back and said, I would be happy to meet with you, Pastor. Well, I didn't know what that meant. I thought they just wanted the house. and he would say anything to get the house. Well, this guy really fooled me. They showed up with the big moving van up on the corner, and they put out what furniture they had, or started putting it out. Before it ever was unloading, he was in my office down the hill in the office complex. And he came in, he had his Bible with him, closed the door behind him. It's a big desk with a big glass cover. And he put that Bible down on it, leaned on that glass cover, got right up toward my face, and said, Pastor, when do we start? I feigned innocence and said, start what? He said, you know what you wrote to me about? Oh, yeah. I said, come on, I'll take you across the hall and show you the conference room of the church. Could you start tomorrow? He said, what time? I said, say 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, I'll be here with bells on. So I took him over to the conference room. I said, we'll meet at this big table right here. I'll sit on one side, you sit on the other. He said, what shall I bring with me? I said, go to Walmart and get the biggest, thickest spiral notebook you can find. Bring your favorite translation of the Bible and a second translation of the Bible, and then bring a whole package of 4x6 note cards. We're going to memorize Scripture at least 2 a week, and we're going to I'm going to teach every day, and I expect you to write down everything I say. That's the first rule. Now, God favors that too. There's no question about it. You're wasting His breath if you don't write it down. You can't remember it. You wouldn't have a Bible if you trusted your memory. You wouldn't have to have a Bible. Just get it in there. He doesn't trust your memory. He expects everything of truth He gives you to pass through you in kind to somebody else. So you should make a habit, write down everything you hear. You say it's not worth writing down. Well, you're wrong. Something in there is worth writing down. Even if it's only a sentence or two, write it down. God will transit. And your stock will begin to mount of things you can transit to other people. So we got started the next day. He was there when I walked in at about 2 minutes till 1. And the things were already stacked on the desk. And so I went around and sat down. We visited just a moment. And then I said, I want to give you the ground rules. And I gave him the ground rules. Number one, write down everything I said. Now, the guy's left-handed. He's short. He's got a shiny bald head with just a strip of hair right around his ears. And so, left-handed, he wrote like this. He put his right arm on his notebook, and many left-handers write like this. And that's the way he did. He had his head down. I never saw his face. I had to look at that cue ball all the time. Unless he raised his hand and said, may I ask a question? Of course. And he'd be up to ask his question. Or he would say, would you repeat that? And keep his head down, ready to write. And I'd repeat it, and he would go on writing. The guy was incredible. May I cut across a lot of territory? I did not know it. I didn't know it the entire time they were there. I didn't find it out till I visited with him last year. He's dyslexic. He ain't a very good likely prospect to do all this. He's dyslexic. He wasn't a field missionary. Never witnessed for Christ in his life. He was the financial missionary for the Venezuelan Baptist Convention. So it didn't look very spiritual at all. I didn't know any of this. I found out that second one right near the end of their time at home. They'd been home for 6 months after we got started. And one night we had an incredibly anointed service. It was like the Shekinah decided to camp. And I had just led 3 lost men to Christ at the prayer altar. And we got up, and one of them was weeping. And I said, go and sit down, I'll recognize you in a few minutes. I looked up, and there were Victor and Sherry Coleman standing at the aisle, holding hands. They both were weeping. And I got up and went up. I thought, uh-oh. I put my hand on their folded hands. I said, what are you coming for? And he could not speak. She said, Brother Herb, may I say something to the church? This is a lovely lady. 2 beautiful little girls. And I said, certainly. So I just took her up into the high pulpit and introduced her, and she stepped up there still weeping. And she said, Vic and I have a confession to make to the church. I thought, uh-oh. But it wasn't that kind of confession. She said, we were not going back to the field. We got hurt by other missionaries. We came home to stay. He's been looking for a job. But she said, he's been meeting with the pastor, and I've been meeting in the Radical Young Women's, in the Young Women's Radical Missions group, and our hearts are on fire, and we cannot stay home. So they, 6 months later, packed their bags and headed back to Venezuela. About 5 months later, I received a letter from him. Only letter I ever received from him. And in the heart of the letter, here's what it said, as if it's an incidental statement. He said, we had a missions march. That's capital M, capital M. Did you hear about the guy that worked in an M&M factory, candy factory, and they fired him for throwing the W's away? and so he came in, started meeting with me, wrote all that down, went back to the field, and 25 years went by. I didn't hear anything more. He said we had a missions march. Let me finish the sentence. And we had 1,374 professions of faith. I wrote him back and I said, wonderful, an evangelistic crusade. I hope every last one of them was saved. Amen. That's wonderful. And closed the letter. That was all the correspondence we had. 25 years later, my friend, his name is Enrique Montoya. He's a major leader in the Baptist Convention he was. It's OYA. He died within the last year. Incredible guy. He was a coordinator for every movement that I went to. Pastors' conferences, national convention conferences. This was different. He called me. This is 25 years after I received that letter from Vic Coleman. He said, can you clear a full 10 days and come down to Valencia, the Baptist campground, and you will teach 400 college juniors, seniors, and seminary students. I said, what do you want me to teach them? He said, teach them 3 sessions on disciple making for each session on evangelism. I said, what date? He told me, I looked at my calendar, it was wide open. I said, I'll pencil it in my calendar now, wait for a letter of confirmation from you. It came almost immediately. So on the assigned date, Brother Calvin, is it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I had an African American from Dallas call me. His name is Wayne Mitchell, incredible guy. And we were visiting. He said, where are you going next? I said, well, I have a trip scheduled to Venezuela. He said, do you need a traveling companion? I said, I'm going alone. I would welcome a traveling companion. He said, put me down. I'm on board. He came and sat in with him. He gave a devotional study early before breakfast every morning. That's all he did. He listened. I've got his testimony on film. It is massively big. He said, I have never heard anything like this in my life. This has absolutely changed the course of all my thinking as a Christian. I want to go home and implement all of this. And he's doing it in Dallas today. I receive email letters from his disciples regularly. Well, so I taught them Monday all day long, started early, went late, Tuesday all day long, Wednesday all day long, Thursday we decided to give them a 2-hour break Thursday afternoon, so we went to the middle of the afternoon and we're going to give them 2 hours off just before supper. And so Wayne and I stayed in the cabin out back. The long auditorium was this way, and there's the front door. There's a circle drive out there, and then the back door's here. We came in that back door, walked right down this wall here, and the chairs were facing the audience, so we never saw what was on this wall back here. Don't know how I missed it. And on Thursday, we came back in from visiting with all those. If we found any English speakers, we'd go out and listen to what they were saying. It was incredible. They were repeating word for word what we had taught them. Every one of them had the assignment of teaching a session, and none of them knew which one was going to be until they got out to the table where the 12 of them were. So each one of them had to be ready. See, this is the way you build impacting disciples. You give assignments just like Jesus did. You supervise them, build them, affirm them, correct them, whatever's necessary, the dimensions of building a person. And we came in that back door to come and get our things to go to supper. We're walking down that aisle, and I saw that big, bright, red lettered sign up on the wall. Here's what it said: 25th anniversary of annual missions march. Capital M, capital M. I thought, where have I heard that term before? Missions march. Missions march. I was about halfway down the aisle when it struck me like a bolt of lightning. That's the term Vic Coleman wrote home years ago. I didn't think of it at the moment, exactly 25 years before. And so I went to Enrique Montoya. I said, would you translate that sign for me? He translated exactly what I thought. I said, does this have anything to do with Caracas? He raised his finger and said, that's where it started. I said, Central Baptist Church? He said, that's where it started. I said, do you know a man named Vic Coleman? He said, he's the one that started it. And his eyes filled up with tears. I said, where is he now? He said, well, one of the girls got deathly sick. The doctor said, take her home or lose her. So within 3 years after he started it, they're out of here and went back home. I said, what has happened? He said, well, the story is he went in to see his Hispanic pastor at Central Baptist Church in Caracas. And he said, I think I have a strategy that will multiply the evangelistic result of this national convention by 100% in 5 years. Well, now, pastors don't tend to listen to missionaries. They're very respectful to them, but they don't tend to listen to them. And this is not even a field missionary. So it doesn't sound hopeful at all, but somebody orchestrated this, big time. So he said, what do you think you could do to accomplish that? He said, come over, and they sat down together. He opened his notebook and shared with him one session of strategy, then turned to the next tab, shared with him one supportive session, and then turned to the big unit at the back and shared with him a curriculum session, what you actually teach a disciple. And he said, but what are you going to do? He said, I want you to get me the 50 best Christians in the churches of Caracas for 3 months. We'll meet on Monday night, Wednesday night, Friday night for 2 hours each night, and I'm going to teach them representative passages out of this notebook like they were taught to me. The pastor bought into it. So they started meeting on Monday night, and Vic, dyslexic Vic, wasn't even a field missionary, started teaching all these great Christians out of these churches in Venezuela, and he said, in Caracas, and he said, then we're going to ask them for 8 days of their lives. So we'll finish on Friday night, the end of 3 months, 8 o'clock Saturday morning to 8 o'clock Saturday night. They'll go out door to door all day long. In twos, in this case with a sponsor, an adult. And that's what I asked him, well, what am I doing here? Who are these people? Are you ready for this? He said, this is the older youth branch of the annual missions march. I said, it started with 50? Yes. And this is just juniors, seniors, and seminary students in there and I'm telling you what, they were like sponges. They just followed me around in crowds everywhere, punching questions at me, all this kind of thing. They were writing constantly in the sessions. In other words, they're going to change the world. And they know they're in on something big. I said, this is not all of them. He said, no, this doesn't include the junior high students and high school students. This doesn't include the young children, the older children. This doesn't include male training and female training. I said, how big is this? He said, I don't think any of us can believe how big it is. I said, how long is it going on? He said, can you imagine us stopping something like this? I said, 25 years later, this guy just suddenly stood up at full height, tears just flooded out of his eyes. He said, yes, and Brother Herb, at least 125,000 new Christians later. In other words, 1,374. You got 400 of these. I said, can you give me an exact? He said, no, it's at least 125,000 new Christians later. I said, has anyone ever told him? He said, I don't know. Well, when I got back home, first thing I did, I went to the telephone, called Jacksonville, Arkansas, and talked to them. I said, I'm coming over to First Baptist to preach in about a month. Can I see you while I'm there? They said, why don't you come over on Friday evening, spend the night with us, spend all day Saturday, and Saturday night you can stay with us, and you preach on Sunday. Well, I couldn't do that, so I got up early on Saturday, got there just after sunup, and we cried all day long. They did not even know what had happened. They didn't even know the report. They said, are you sure? I said, well, I'm citing your good friend, Enrique Montoya, and he told me this story, and you could easily believe it when you see what I was doing there. 400 college juniors, seniors, and seminary students, and this doesn't include the bulk of those to be trained, and they go out every year for 8 days. That's Saturday through Saturday, from 8 to 8, every day, witnessing door to door in the cities and villages of Venezuela. This will work anywhere. See, in America, we've convinced ourselves these people are hard. Yeah, but you haven't consulted what God does with hard hearts. Is not your word like a hammer that breaks the rock in pieces? See, they're just not exposed to the word. So they're stiff-necked and stubborn, rebellious and hard-hearted. But you let God put the plowshare of conviction into that soil, He'll go to the core of the character, split it wide open, drop a seed in there, and you're not going to believe how Paul emerges out of Saul. Now, it's time for me to go. So I'm going to just stop right there. I've said more than you'll live up to if you had 12 lifetimes. But you make a stab at it. I mean, I live this all day long. I know somebody can do all this because I've done it, and God has been incredibly gracious to me. I told Judy recently, I cannot believe that God has let me live long enough to see what I'm seeing. I wish I could tell you about other mission fields. What's happening in China is unbelievable. Dustin, last time I was there, they had a Hi-8 camera. The Chinese made it. Hi-8, that's a television newscast camera. And we got driven off the compound by the authorities. We barely got out. And the leader took us back to the city, and 12 Chinese leaders followed us in cars behind us. We got out and turned onto the highway, and had gone about 100 to 150 yards down the highway. This whole line of official policemen came in, turned in. They saw us there. The two representatives came on to inspect. Somebody apparently told them. And the coordinator came in and said, "Stop now and come with me." Well, they immediately started singing. They're all Christians in the compound. And he took us out. They'd already loaded our luggage, zipped it up, had it in the car, shaded, tinted car. And we got out, they drove us out the highway, just got out on the highway when the officials came in, that long string of cars coming after us. We laughed. We were in an upper room waiting for a second when they went and looked to see if they were there. And I said, "There's a window. Somebody find me a basket and a rope." But we didn't have to. We laughed at this. We didn't really think we were under threat. And we got back and they brought these cars in. We checked into a hotel and got a suite that had a closed up second room and 2 beds in it. And we lined chairs up against the back wall, and these 12 leaders came in, and that high camera here, I was about 8 feet away from it. I sat in this chair, the Mandarin translator sat here, and Clint Davis, or one of the team members, sat here, and then we have perfect right to interrupt each other at any time, to fill in, or to correct, or to add, or to subtract, or something. So they filmed. We started at 10:30 on Thursday morning, went to 11 o'clock that night. The next day, we started at 7 in the morning, went to 11 o'clock that night, and then we had 2 hours on Saturday. They filmed all of this. We finished. The cameraman turned the camera off, and the coordinator sitting on the other side of the camera got up and came walking up to me. He cocked his head wryly and smiled, and he said, "I suppose you know, sir, that this can be copied 1,000,000 times." I said, "That's an exaggeration." He said, "You think so? Just watch." See, the Chinese believe they can win the whole wide world. They say, "What can you do to us? It hasn't already been done to us." See, we just haven't died enough. None of us has actually shed blood. I think we better get ready, because God's going to correct that. Our days are numbered. We're going to go underground whether we like it or not. And they're going to dispose of our buildings first. It may be the best thing that's ever happened to the movement in America. Where you find out who the Christians are. This is big time stuff. And the mandate is just one command. Turn people into what I turned 11 surviving men into. Disciples. So this is your assignment, my assignment, our assignment. And anybody in this room, your very motivation that brought you here is enough to carry you there. And if you'll just equip yourself, God will wear you out all over the world. Paul said, "I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to keep you and to give you an inheritance among those who are set aside to his purpose, unto those who are sanctified." That would be my prayer for you as I depart these grounds. I'm going home and see the Razorbacks. Yeah.